To order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Let me welcome all of you to today's hearing, and I'm eager to hear from today's distinguished panel of witnesses, each of whom is a leader in overcoming obstacles to bring more people to STEM studies and careers. So I thank you for the work that you do and for being with us today. There is no denying that the fact that our success as a nation is closely tied to our capacity to build and sustain a highly skilled workforce, one that is equipped to take on the pressing challenges of the 21st century and to maintain our leadership in the global economy. Right now, we are facing grave challenges on many fronts. We are battling an opioid crisis and seeking cures for disease like cancer. We are losing lives every day to gun violence and suicide. We are rooting out terrorists, fighting back against attempts to hack our democracy. We're racing to find sustainable sources of energy and working to mitigate the destructive effects of climate change. Meanwhile, our economic competitiveness is threatened as competitors like China invest heavily in science and make advances in critical technologies like the quantum computing and artificial intelligence. To solve these problems, we need a cadre of trained scientists and engineers pushing the boundaries of what we know and what we can achieve. We need computer scientists and economists, biologists and mathematicians, engineers, chemists, and social scientists. So far, we've gotten by with a STEM workforce that does not come close to representing the diversity of our nation. However, if we continue to leave behind so much of our nation's brain power, we cannot succeed. The Census Bureau predicts that by 2045, over half of all Americans will be non-white. Over half of all children at 18 will be non-white by 2020. As the rest of the country becomes more diverse, the STEM workforce has been slow to respond. In addition, I have watched with dismay for decades as women have also made too few gains in STEM workforce. Discrimination, harassment, bias, and cultural and institutional barriers are preventing many of our brightest minds from realizing their greatest potential. Today's discussion is long overdue. The last time the Science Committee held a hearing focused on the issue of broadening participation in STEM was in March of 2010. Dr. Malcom can confirm that because she was here testifying about the challenges facing women, minorities, and persons with disabilities at all levels of education and career development. I'm sorry to say that in the years since this committee last addressed this issue, progress has been very slow. Some fields have seen no gains at all. In 2010, women earned 20% of physics bachelor's degrees. Today, they earn 19%. The share of engineering degrees earned by Black men is the same today as it was in 2010, just 3%. Hispanic women are still earning less than 2% of the bachelor's degrees in computer science. We have a lot of work to do. As chairwoman of the Science Committee, I'm determined to do what I can to move the needle. I was very glad to be joined by my good friend and ranking member, Mr. Lucas, in introducing H.R. 2528, the STEM Opportunities Act of 2019, earlier this week. This bill supports policy reforms in research and data collection to understand and lower barriers faced by women and minority researchers in academia and federal laboratories. The way I see it, we have two possible futures, one in which we embrace the changing face of our nation and one in which our leadership continues to erode. The choice is an easy one, but the work required to get us there is not. I look forward to hearing the recommendations and insight from this wise panel on how we get there. Before I recognize Mr. Lucas for this opening statement, I ask for the Business Roundtable principles of investing in people in STEM workforce and principles on pursuing inclusive innovation be placed in the record. Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lucas for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, for holding this hearing today to discuss how we can achieve the promise of a more diverse STEM workforce in the United States. This committee has a long bipartisan history of supporting STEM education for all, and I look forward to continuing that today. When women and minorities face cultural and institutional barriers to access and advancement in STEM careers, our nation's technological competitiveness suffers. The only way we'll achieve our potential is by utilizing America's most valuable resources, our people. Now, that means developing a diverse STEM-capable workforce from every education level and from every background. STEM employment in the U.S. continues to grow faster than any other sector, and we're struggling to meet that demand. In order to meet it, the development of talent from all groups is essential. More graduates with STEM degrees means more advanced technologies and a more robust economy. But it's not just about the economy. STEM graduates have the potential to develop technologies that could save thousands of lives, jumpstart a new industry, or even discover new worlds. Women and the underrepresented minorities constitute a substantial portion of the U.S. population. However, our STEM workforce fails to reflect this diversity. While women make up half of the U.S. workforce, they comprise less than 30% of the STEM workforce. Similarly, unrepresented racial and ethnic groups make up only 11% of the workforce. The STEM workforce, I should say. This week I joined Chairwoman Johnson in co-sponsoring the STEM Opportunities Act of 2019 to help address this disparity. This bill requires more comprehensive data collection on students, researchers, and faculty receiving federal science grants. This data will help us identify and reduce the barriers that prevent underrepresented groups from entering and advancing in STEM. It will also help us measure the success of federal STEM programs. As many of the members of this committee know, I'm a proud graduate of a land-grant institution, the OSU, as we say, at Oklahoma State University. Not to be confused with Dr. Moore's institution, the other OSU. The land-grant mission is to serve students of all backgrounds and influence people's lives beyond the boundaries of the classroom in service to the community. In my home district, I have seen this mission brought to life at both OSU and at Langston University, which is a historically black college and a land-grant institution. Minority-serving institutions like Langston are successfully making strides in increasing the number of minority students graduating with STEM degrees. It is important that we also increase STEM opportunities for American Indian and Alaska Native students, who are also overlooked in this discussion, often, I should say, unfortunately, overlooked in this discussion. The STEM Opportunities Act of 2019 will bolster the NSF's Tribal College and Universities program by providing grants to enhance computer science education at these institutions. Access to computer science resources and the development of computing skills is critical for underrepresented students in both rural and urban communities. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here. This entire panel not only brings a wealth of leadership and expertise in STEM education and workforce development, but they also provide inspiration to students of all backgrounds who are pursuing STEM careers. I look forward to hearing more from each of you about how we can support, encourage, and develop the next generation of STEM students. Lastly, I again want to thank Chairwoman Johnson for her leadership on this important issue. I know it's a subject near and dear to her heart, and I look forward to working with her on the STEM Opportunities Act and additional STEM legislation focused on rural students in the coming years. Thank you, witnesses, for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. Are there other members who wish to submit additional opening statements to the record? At this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Mae Jemison. Dr. Jemison leads 100-year Starship, a global initiative seed funded through a competitive grant from DARPA to ensure capabilities for human travel to another star within the next 100 years while transforming life on Earth. Dr. Jemison served 6 years as a NASA astronaut and was the first woman of color in the world to go into space. She's also chair of the National Academy's study on promising practices for addressing the underrepresentation of women in science, engineering, and medicine. I welcome Dr. Jemison. Our next witness is Dr. Shirley Malcom. Dr. Malcom is a senior advisor and director of Sea Change at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She works to support research and practice to improve the quality and increase access to education and careers in STEM fields. She served on the National Science Board, on the President Clinton's Committee on Advisors on Science and Technology. Dr. Malcom also serves as co-chair of the Gender Advisory Board of the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development and Gender Insight. After Dr. Malcom is Dr. Lorelle Espinosa. Dr. Espinosa is the Vice President for Research at the American Council on Education. She is responsible for developing and managing the organization's thought leadership portfolio and for ensuring a strong evidence base across ACE's programs and services. Prior to ACE, she held senior roles at the Institution of Higher Education Policy and App Associates. Dr. Espinosa is co-chair of the National Academy's Study Committee, Closing the Equity Gap, Revitalizing STEM Education, and Workforce Readiness Programs in the nation's minority-serving institutions. Our fourth witness, Dr. James Moore. Dr. Moore is Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer of the Ohio State University. He is also the Distinguished Professor of Urban Education in the College of Education and Human Ecology and inaugural Executive Director of the Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center on the African American male. From 2015 to 2017, Dr. Moore served as Program Director for Broadening Participation in Engineering at the National Science Foundation. His research focuses on school counseling, gifted urban multicultural higher education, and STEM education. And finally, Dr. Barbara Whye. Ms. Wyatt is Intel's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and Chief Human Resources Officer for Technology, Systems Architecture, and Client Group. She also leads Intel's Diversity and Technology Initiative to reach full representation of women and underrepresented minorities in Intel's workforce. She has led the investment strategy for Intel's global STEM education portfolio with a focus on girls and underrepresented populations. She joined Intel more than 20 years ago as an engineer. As our witnesses should know, you will have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing, and so when all of you have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin a round of questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. So now, we will start with Dr. Jemison.
Really critical issue that we're.
Ma'am, you want to turn on your microphone?
I thought it was on, but you probably heard me. Thank you for inviting me here today. And I want to start off by talking about 100-Year Starship, which is about trying to make sure we have the capabilities for human interstellar travel within 100 years that was seed funded by DARPA. And the reason why we're doing that is because I believe that pursuing an extraordinary tomorrow creates a better world today. It's by pushing ourselves today that we have the ability to incorporate all of this incredible technology that we're looking at. I am an individual who has been exposed to the most advanced technologies and bountiful economic resources, and at the same time, a woeful pittance of human compassion. I am an individual who has lived with people who have meager resources and who've persevered in conditions that would try us all. They relied on technologies that have been around for thousands of years, but they would share what they have with the stranger. This is where I'm coming from, because over the course of my career and training as a doctor, as an engineer, I have attended and taught in schools and programs and universities which have been classified at different times as the best and the worst in their nation: Cambodian refugee camp, Chicago Public Schools, Los Angeles Unified School District, Sierra Leone, Dartmouth, Cornell, Stanford. And it's from that perspective that I bring my comments. When I left NASA, the first thing I did was start an international science camp called the Earth We Share. Because my mother had been a school teacher for over 25 years in the Chicago Public Schools, I recognized how important it was to do active work around science literacy. That is, the ability to read an article in the newspaper about a subject, whether it be the environment or health, and be able to understand it. And we work with kids around the world. It is important that we have other great representation, because right now, STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, are slashing a path to the future, right? And that future is not necessarily one that we can be assured of, that it can be assured that it's going to be beneficial. But the scientists, the engineers, and those who fund and support them get to do a couple of things. They get to choose the problems to be worked on and researched. They get to choose the methodologies with which that problem will be approached. They get to choose to keep data sets or to throw them out as irrelevant or flawed. The scientists and engineers and those who fund and support them also have an opportunity to decide the priority with which problems are addressed. They get an opportunity to decide and evaluate whether a solution was effective or not. So when you think about that, it requires that we have full representation. It's not a nicety, it's a necessity, because we're losing so much of that perspective that we have to bear. And when we look at what was really a difficult situation, women and people of color in this country have contributed over the years in countless ways, despite being left out. So if you look from Rosalind, whether you look at the women who coded for NASA, right, and did all the kinds of work in the mathematics, we know that they've done an incredible job. We see every day that women have done an incredible job. We see every day from Dr. Daniel Hell Williams, and you can go on and on. African Americans have contributed. People of color have contributed. So what we have to do is to make sure that we use all the talent. I'm really excited about this bill. I want to throw in a couple of things. What child doesn't deserve an excellent teacher? This really starts with education. With me today is Dr. Peggy Brookins, who is the head of the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, because we need to have education and standards. I've been excited to work with Bayer Corporation over the years. Solutions exist where we've been able to change the curriculum so that we do hands-on science education, which is the most effective way to do it. And the ASSET program has lifted not only science scores, but reading and mathematics scores even more. The Earth We Share, which I talked about, brought in trains teachers from around the world. And then finally, if I look at what can I offer for the bill, it ranges from making sure we think about skilled technicians and labor who really make up most of the tech workforce, as well as making sure that we hold organizations accountable.
Thank you. Dr. Malcom.
Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Shirley Malcom, Senior Advisor and Director of Sea Change at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the largest general scientific society in the United States and publisher of the science family of journals. Our mission is simple: to advance science, engineering, and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all people. I have spent my entire career working to address concerns around equity in STEM. I do this partly because of my own pathway from the Jim Crow South to years as the only in my class, in my major, in my lab group, in my faculty, in my committees, on boards. I was drawn to science after the launch of Sputnik because of the compelling vision and opportunities, even for a little girl from Birmingham, for understanding and making a difference in the world, for earning a living and making a life. There are many more people out there from all backgrounds and experiences who are drawn to STEM and who need to see a pathway to turn interest into outcomes. STEM needs these people for the energy, dynamism, and diverse perspectives they bring. U.S. research and education cannot be excellent unless they are inclusive. Diversity improves the inputs and the outcomes. The vibrancy and strength of the U.S. economy and the health, security, and quality of life of our citizens are all intertwined with the health of the scientific enterprise and are products of the investment that this country has made in STEM research and education. Our nation has supported invention and innovation across diverse fields and partnered with the private sector, producing the most powerful engine for economic growth in the world. But that is not guaranteed. At the core of the economy are people, not just the scientists and the engineers and the mathematicians in our colleges and universities and industries, national labs and biomedical facilities, but also the STEM teachers, technicians, managers, financiers, patent attorneys, and others whose collective efforts, grounded in science, fuel the innovation economy. STEM knowledge and skills are not just requirements for those of us in STEM, but for all throughout the workforce and across the society, from farmers utilizing weather data and robotics to manage crops, to those who care for us when we are sick using high-tech diagnostic tools. We can only get to this point by expanding the pool of talent, tapping into the vast well of women and minorities and persons with disabilities who are currently underrepresented in STEM. We know that these groups don't participate in STEM at levels that are reflected in either in the population or in higher education, and there are losses at each successive level. This isn't just a reflection of interest or the impact of personal choices. Choice is not what it seems. Choices aren't always informed and may be driven by lack of opportunity or stereotyping. Minority students who come from high-needs K-12 schools may not have opportunities to participate in programs or classes that would enable them to explore their interests in STEM. Poor early-stage preparation and uninspired teaching compounded by low expectations can make it difficult to move forward. At later stages, the absence of role models, institutional and classroom climate, a culture of weeding out, isolation, and the lack of community, incivility, bias, and harassment can all prevent participation. At AAAS, we're engaged in efforts to address the systemic problems that create barriers to success. Among these are efforts to address the culture change within STEM, such as the Societies Consortium on sexual harassment in STEM, with 100 society members, making role models more visible, as in the AAAS If Then and AAAS Limos Ambassadors programs, and building community for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The most ambitious undertaking, however, is Sea Change. Based on a model from higher education in the UK, Sea Change recognizes colleges and universities for work to improve gender and race ethnic equity in STEM. Participating institutions voluntarily develop a data-driven plan to address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, aligning their plan with specific context of the institutions. Institutional plans are developed by rigorous self-assessment and using data to try to understand where you have to go forward. With funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, AAAS and Education Council are updating resources that assist colleges and universities to try to figure out how to do this in ways that are also consistent with judicial rulings and the legal aspects that may come into question. We see much within the STEM Opportunities Act that is highly complementary with Sea Change, and we look forward to working together to figure out how to make those synergies happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Espinosa.
Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. My name is Lorelle Espinosa, and I am the Vice President for Research at the American Council on Education with a 20-year professional focus on diversity and inclusion in the STEM fields. Today, I am here primarily in my capacity as co-chair of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's Committee on Minority Serving Institutions, which recently published the report, Minority Serving Institutions, America's Underutilized Resource for Strengthening the STEM Workforce. I have submitted a copy of the publication's highlights along with my written testimony. The report has many key findings, recommendations, and strategies related to strengthening STEM education and research at the more than 700 2- and 4-year minority serving institutions, also known as MSIs, across the United States. MSIs, of which half are community colleges, enroll nearly 30% of all undergraduates, including a sizable portion of the nation's STEM students, yet are vastly under-resourced and in need of critical STEM infrastructure. In addition to their reach, it is important to acknowledge who MSIs enroll, namely a large proportion of students of color, many of who are low income and the first in their families to attend college. Given this, many MSIs have developed, with intentionality, ways to offer a rich set of academic and social support systems for students that help them thrive academically and prepare for meaningful and sustained contributions to the workforce and to our society. Of the committee's 10 recommendations to MSI stakeholders, specific actions we recommend Congress take include, first, incenting greater investments in MSIs and the strategies that support their students' success as outlined in our report and in my written testimony. This includes new and expanded funding mechanisms that strengthen STEM infrastructure and encourage innovative teaching, learning, and laboratory experiences, as well as substantial growth in mutually beneficial public-private partnerships. Such investment requires significant increases in annual appropriations to support capacity building funds for MSIs and need-based student financial aid, including scholarship aid. Second, taking strategic actions to enhance the clarity, transparency, and accountability for federal investments in STEM education and research at MSIs. It is in the nation's best interest not only to establish new and expand current STEM-focused investments, but also to increase the information available about these funds and their impacts to the MSIs themselves and to their many stakeholders. Third, requiring that federally funded programs include proper resources for a rigorous evaluation component in order to measure the impact of these investments on student learning and career outcomes for STEM graduated MSIs. For improvements in the short term, Congress should require all relevant federal agencies to identify an MSI liaison to coordinate activities, track investments, and report progress toward increasing MSI participation in STEM research and development programs. Next, undertake a production of an annual procurement forecast of opportunities, including grants, contracts, and subcontract opportunities, and cooperative and other transactional agreements that will enable increased participation of MSIs in basic, applied, and advanced STEM research and development programs. This report could serve as a critical resource for policymakers, government agencies, and MSIs themselves to assess and benchmark the impact of national investments in high potential but underserved communities. This forecast report may further encourage other stakeholders to partner with MSIs in new and innovative ways. Next, report on the level of participation of MSIs in prime or subrecipient or contractors in STEM-related activities, including the type of procurement mechanisms and the current investment totals that support STEM research and development. Finally, Congress can track proposal submissions by MSIs in federal contracts, grants, cooperative and other transactional agreements, and small business innovation research and technology transfer programs. In closing, as the nation continues to grow more diverse, the proportion of MSIs in America's higher education system will continue to grow. These institutions are a valuable but underutilized asset for the nation, and with greater investment and intentional support from Congress, states, and the private sector, they can contribute in significant ways to local, regional, and national economic development and job creation. Thank you for your time and attention and for your commitment to diversifying and strengthening our STEM workforce in this country, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Before the next witness, I want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Rush Holt, a former member of this committee, who is now directing AAAS. Thank you for being here. Dr. James Moore.
Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak with your distinguished committee today. Again, my name is James Moore from The Ohio State University. It is a considerable honor to be here today, and I would like to commend Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas for the leadership of the STEM Opportunities Act. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank Representatives Anthony Gonzalez and Troy Balderson for helping to make my testimony possible. I also would like to thank Representative Joyce Beatty from Columbus, Ohio, although she's not a member of the committee, but she is a very active advocate for broadened participation in STEM. How OSU is addressing the lack of diversity in STEM fields is the best illustrated through a pair of Ohio students, Shelby Newsad and Omari Gaskins. Shelby grew up in Beverly, a village of 1,300 in southeastern Ohio, not too far as a crow flies from Representative Balderson's district. Like many rural districts, Shelby's small high school lacked basic science labs, and her only science courses were taught out of old, fading textbooks. While Shelby's intellect earned her a moral scholarship, one of Ohio State's premier diversity merit scholarship programs, she struggled in her biosciences major. As she headed to special tutoring sessions, she questioned whether she would ever catch up to her peers. Now, Omari also grew up in Ohio, but in urban Dayton, a once proud city, now battered by opiates and joblessness. Inspired by Marvel Comics and Iron Man movies, Omari joined a robotics team after he left his neighborhood school for a charter high school. Smart enough to teach himself how to code, but without the means to pay for college. Omari found a pathway to Ohio State thanks to our flagship Young Scholars Program, what we reference as YSP. Now in its 30th year, YSP finds promising low-income 8th grade students in some of Ohio's most vulnerable school districts across the state. We provide our young scholars with ongoing academic support during their high school years and later offer them strong financial packages to Ohio State, provided that they maintain certain academic standards throughout high school and college. The ongoing support during their pre-collegiate and collegiate years allows students like Omari to pursue STEM fields and other academic areas. Currently, 43% of our young scholars are STEM majors. We have approximately over 800 pre-collegiate students and over 400 students who have matriculated at The Ohio State University. Both Shelby and Omari, one white, rural, and female, and the other black, urban, and male, teach us valuable lessons about diversity in STEM. Lesson 1, we need to be innovative and inclusive in the way that we identify talent. We are losing too many promising students before they ever reach our doors simply because of their zip code and the schools that reside in these communities. Lesson 2, when we find these students from underserved areas, they're often unprepared for college-level STEM coursework, requiring valuable human and financial resources to bring them up to speed. Sadly, this can cause them to want to quit college altogether. Higher education partnerships with school districts like YSP can help improve STEM education outcomes for students of color, especially those who attend high-poverty, under-resourced school systems. Further, early intervention programs can be a major part of the solution to the preparation gap. YSP intervenes at the 8th grade to ensure that students are prepared for college and offers ongoing academic support experiences. Major companies are beginning to understand the importance and significance of attracting STEM and non-STEM from diverse communities. Hence, J.P. Morgan Chase recently made a major investment in both our Moral Scholars Program and Young Scholars Program to ensure our students develop the right skills and directions to enter the world of work. My own academic research has studied key factors impacting academic and career development of African American males in STEM fields. And based on this research, we found that family influence and encouragement, positive K-12 experiences, their own interests and aspirations in STEM, as well as their academic experiences in college with their peers, college faculty and staff were all crucial in impacting factors for African American males. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Barbara Whye.
Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to be with you this morning. I'd also like to recognize Representative Bonamici from Oregon and Representative Biggs from Arizona. It was a STEM education that rapidly propelled me and my 7 siblings out of poverty. I am the product of a STEM education. I was born in the South to 2 amazing parents who lived through segregation and racism like so many other Black families. Their options for finishing high school were filled with insurmountable obstacles. Neither of my parents finished high school, yet they pushed on. They instilled in us the importance of an education. All 8 of us became STEM professionals, scientists, engineers, and executives. I sit before you today as an engineer because I had access and role models. My great-great-grandparents were born enslaved in this country in the 1800s. Recently, I visited their tombstones in Conway, South Carolina. They had the wherewithal to name my great-great-grandfather Favor, and his wife was named Pleasant. It is the same optimism that is a part of my inherited DNA that I believe we as a nation can bring to this challenge. It is imperative that legislation expands opportunities in undergraduate STEM education for underserved students receiving degrees in STEM education. The STEM Opportunities Act does exactly that, and thank you, Madam Chair. For the proposed legislation to be successful, our country should quickly shift from problem admiring to problem solving. We have Einsteins all over our nation who are untapped and who have not been given access to an equitable and quality education. As a nation, we must put forth compelling, specific, and immediate steps to achieve a different outcome. Access to a quality education should be a basic human right. With the rate of technology and the increase of STEM jobs across this nation, a STEM-ready student is a workforce-ready student. However, students all over this country cannot tap into the coursework that would put them on the right trajectory. Every child should have coding as a school subject and experience by 3rd grade. Students are using technology in everything they do. They should understand the power and the opportunity it provides. Intel recognizes the importance of growing pathways. For example, we partner with 3 schools in the Navajo Nation and the Oakland Unified School District as a part of our $300 million diversity and tech commitment. Within 2 years, student enrollment in computer science classes increased by nearly 400%. Being bold and taking specific actions is in the DNA of Intel. Through the leadership and commitment of our CEO, Bob Swan, the executive team, and employees around the world, Intel has achieved full representation based on market availability in the U.S. workforce a full 2 years ahead of schedule. We have the ability within us to solve anything when we take action. We know the power of making the impossible possible, and the power lies within every single one of us. As you consider the legislation this Congress, I would ask this committee to be bold in your actions and be transparent. We must strengthen our systems and hold leaders accountable to eradicate biases. You can hold programs accountable to ensure that students at the most mature stages of the pathway are successfully retained and complete their educations as those earlier in the pathway. Ensure that HBCUs, HSIs, and the tribal colleges have the resources to establish top-tier programs in the STEM disciplines. Focus on the creative programs and collaborations that emphasize hands-on STEM activities that connect technology careers to real applications. Authorize more funding toward STEM-based research and faculty programs, especially those targeting the underserved. The STEM Opportunities Act is a good start and a testament to this committee's commitment to developing solutions to support underrepresented minorities and women in STEM. Intel will remain a committed partner to growing STEM opportunities and solutions, and I look forward to continuing the work with this committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We now will begin our first round of questioning, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Despite a lot of attention being focused on the issue of increasing the participation of women and underrepresented minorities, progress has been very slow and in some cases non-existent. Why has so little progress been made despite the amount of resources and attention devoted to these issues and our knowledge of proven solutions? And you can start, Dr. Jemison, and we can just go down.
Let's do this again. I want to just start off by saying I'm here also as the chair of the committee of the National Academies of Sciences on how do we improve the representation and the leadership of women in STEM fields. And the report is due out in November, and I'm going to make sure everybody gets a copy. But some of the things that we are looking at is the fact that there are solutions. We already know how to increase things. The issue is how do we get individual organizations and institutions to enact them. And some of the things that we're finding is many times it has to do with that perception of perhaps there's not enough support at the head of institutions. We know that when there is that support, things change. So at Harvey Mudd College, when Maria Whye came in, she was able to triple the number of women graduating in computer sciences in 5 years. So it really has to do with institutional support at the top and there being some repercussions about not effecting change.
Thank you.
We have invested in a lot of intervention programs over the years, and we have a lot of answers for a lot of the barriers that we see. The difficulty, I think, is that we don't put the pieces together. This is one of the reasons that we have turned to Sea Change as a more systemic, institutional, transformational strategy. You can't have just someone worried about the entering student over here and not the graduate student over here. You've got to really look at the entirety of the policies, the practices, and the processes that are in place that put barriers in the way. And we utilize the interventions that appear actually as solutions to a lot of these things. I think that this notion of having a scaffold way for institutions to look at all of these elements at the same time is really powerful. That is the only way to begin to look at these issues possibly at scale. Congresswoman Johnson, we were pleased to have you at the celebration and have you as the keynote at the celebration for Sea Change. Those institutions had gone through a process of self-assessment. They had gone through a process of actually looking at all of the aspects. They might not have chosen to deal with all of them, but they had solutions that had come from the earlier investments that have been made around intervention programs. So I think that we've got to move this to a different scale. We can't really up the numbers in a large amount without having institutional change. and having them do a lot more of the holistic strategies that it's really going to take to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Espinosa.
Thank you for the question. The committee that I co-chaired would say that we're not investing dollars, attention into the institutions that are serving the greatest number of students of color and low-income students, again, our nation's minority-serving institutions. These are institutions that are under-resourced and don't have, in many cases, the critical infrastructure that are needed. The best practices that we know, again, as someone just mentioned, we know a lot about what works in broadening participation. We know that undergraduate research experiences, for example, is a huge predictor of success, but we don't equip many of the institutions where these students are attending with the infrastructure to offer such experiences. So there's a great deal of focus in our report on many of these successful strategies. I'll also just mention that MSIs not only offer these experiences when they can, but they do it in a way that is culturally aware and in a way that sets high expectations for their students no matter where they start.
Thank you. Dr. Moore.
Well, I'll be succinct and try not to say some of the same things, but there are 5 things that is really important that it should be thought about consistently. The first one is interest. We know how to get students interested in STEM, but it's not as much how do we sustain their interest. And as these are K to grade kinds of issues, even the individuals who do obtain a STEM degree, oftentimes they opt out of the field because of the experiences that they had throughout the educational experience. The other one is preparation. Preparation is a major issue at the K-12 particularly, and then sometimes it even seeps in the graduate and professional level. All AP is not created equally. All honors is not created equal. Students matriculate at Ohio State and they realize they have classmates who had the same textbook, the same biology textbook in high school, and that was the first time that they have ever been exposed to it. So we see malpractice going on throughout our educational institutions in America. The other one is experiences, making sure that they have adequate educational and career experiences that is indicative of what it means not only to go in a STEM field, to be a part of the new frontier of STEM. If we don't think about the new frontier of STEM, we'll just have another disparity even when they get in STEM. The next one is connections, making sure that they have access to mentors that reflect and look like them. You know, this is anecdotal. When I was at the National Science Foundation, and when we would do reviews of grants, if the professor was Iranian, it seems like all the students were Iranian. When the professor was Chinese, it seems that all the professors were Chinese. And increasingly, we know that HBCUs, minority-serving institutions, are educating a disproportion of the underrepresented groups. But what is happening when what most people are not paying attention, the professors do not mimic the students, even in HBCUs, like they did many years ago. In turn, it's not creating the kind of relationships that they once had many years ago. And last but not least, opportunities. Even when you, at every level of the educational journey, students need to have opportunities, because when they don't have these opportunities, they don't necessarily get to reach the level that they reach their full potential. But if your interests, your preparation, your experiences, and your connections impact whether or not you can even access the opportunities when they come to you.
Thank you. Ms. Wyatt.
At Intel, we learned quickly that what you measure matters, and we learned right away that we can't hire our way to success. Thank you. That we can't hire our way to success. You actually have to focus on retention. We're one of the few companies that's actually monitoring our retention and how our women not only starting in engineering and engineering careers at Intel, but how are we being inclusive in our environment and creating a sense of belonging so that we can also retain this talent.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lucas stepped out. He will return. In the meantime, I will call on Ms. Bonamici.
sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks.
Yes, ma'am, we do have Republicans here today. I represent the Tennessee Valley of Alabama, home of the Marshall Space Flight Center. We like to call ourselves the birthplace of America's space program. And Dr. Jemison, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that to us, you're a hero and a role model, having come from the Tennessee Valley, which is Decatur, where your birthplace, which is in the Tennessee Valley. And we also named a high school after you, Jemison High School, just a few years ago. So that gives you an idea of how highly we think of you and everything you've done in your personal life and in your professional career. I'd be remiss, though, if I didn't add that I'm a Trekkie, and knocking the ball out of the ballpark was when I found out you also were on a roll of Star Trek, Second Chances. So that's really cool, okay? With that as a little bit of a backdrop, here's a question for you, if you don't mind. In your testimony, you highlight the demand for skilled technical workers, STEM jobs that do not require a 4-year degree. You also mention that women and underrepresented minorities are frequently unaware and left out of pathways to these careers. What can be done to improve the awareness and participation in these programs, and is there a role for industry to play?
Thank you very much for the question, and I do. My father worked on Redstone Arsenal as a roofer before I was born, so he was part of it too. Thank you for the question about skilled technicians and skilled labor, which actually do represent the majority of the STEM workforce. And in addition to that, they are very high-paying jobs, and women very frequently do not know about them. And we also have a workforce shortage in those areas. What can we do? We can, first of all, make people aware of them by actually having those jobs represented in television programs. When we talk about this, right now, we always talk about 4-year degrees. I was busily writing notes about that. We talk about 4-year degrees. We talk about academia. But the workforce that actually built the shuttle were not 4-year degree engineers. They were skilled technicians. So we need to make sure that those jobs are represented. Then we have to make sure, I believe, that community colleges have the ability to do vocational work and are not seen as sort of a remedial place for what was not done in high school so that people can get into 4-year colleges. Actually, community colleges do incredible work with training technicians. Vocational education in high school could be always also a pathway for people seeing and understanding what are some of the jobs that are available to them. And I just want to go back to something that is really clear. During World War II, women fulfilled many of the jobs that were considered masculine jobs, from, that iconic image of Rosie the Riveter. They also were the ones who transported airplanes around. We need to understand that women can do not only the biotechnician jobs, but they can also do the jobs that's in mechanical welding and building aircraft. Those things are important. So thank you for that question, but we need to get that out front and keep it in our eyesight.
I've got some facts I want to give. I don't know if we're going to have time for a question or not, but this is rather troubling to me, and I just did this research while I was sitting here. One was a comment by Don Lemon that PolitiFact then analyzed, and it was out of wedlock births. And then looking at STEMs and degrees and which races are going into STEM, and it seems that there's an unusual correlation. Let me run through it. Asian Americans, they are number one with the lowest number of out-of-wedlock births, and this is according to the National Center for Education Statistics, at 17% out-of-wedlock birth. They're also number one in terms of number of STEM degrees at 33% of the degrees that are given out to Asian Americans. Caucasian Americans were number two in out-of-wedlock births at 29%, and then number two in STEM degrees at 18%. Hispanic Americans were number three in out-of-wedlock births at 53%, and number three in the STEM degrees at 15%. Native Americans were number four out-of-wedlock births at 66%, and number four and STEM degrees at 14%. And then African Americans were number 5 at 73% out of wedlock births, and that's what caused PolitiFact to look into Don Lemon's statements, because that's what he said. And number 5 in STEM degrees. I hope that we can somehow or another, as a body, Madam Chair, also look into this societal issue and see what can be done, given this rather startling correlation between out-of-wedlock births and then people who then go thereafter into STEM degrees. And my time has expired.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas, and thank you to all of our witnesses. We often talk about our global leadership here in the United States and that we have a country of innovators, and we know that part of that is because of the groundbreaking research that we have invested in, but we also know that we need to educate the next generation to be innovative, to be cutting edge. I also serve on the Education Committee, where right now we're talking about affordable college and retention. That's why I'm back and forth. But Dr. Jemison, you said in your testimony, excellent education must be universal. That's all connected to what we're talking about here today. But we also know that it's not enough just to educate world-class engineers, technologists, and scientists. We need critical thinkers who are creative, who can come up with new ideas and new ways to solve problems. So I am the founder and co-chair of the STEAM Caucus. Will continue to advocate for integrating arts and design into traditional STEM fields to increase the competitiveness and the diversity of our workforce. Ms. Whye, I appreciate your reference and your testimony to the value of and Intel support for STEAM. For students to be successful in the modern economy, we want to teach them that to think creatively. And I think I want to point out that in the district I'm honored to represent, with about 20,000 Intel employees, there's a nationally recognized public STEAM elementary school not too far away. So we know that historically our science and technology workforce has not been inclusive of women and people of color. We heard a lot about that from the witnesses, about the persistent biases and inequities. We know how that's limiting us, because diverse voices help identify problems to tackle and help find new ways to solve them. So according to the recent report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, 58% of individuals in academia experience sexual harassment. Unfortunately, the prevalence of sexual harassment in the sciences often undermines career advancement for women in STEM fields, and I'm proud to support the chairwoman's bill to direct the federal science agencies to implement policy changes to address sexual harassment. I thank her for her continued leadership. Dr. Malcom, in your testimony, you mentioned the engagement of AAAS on the Society's consortium on sexual harassment, and I wonder, has the consortium developed any new guidance, and what can Congress do to make sure that we're not losing the valuable scientific contributions from women in STEM because of an unsafe working environment?
Thank you very much for that question. AAAS is engaged with the American Geophysical Union, the American Association of Medical Colleges, Association of American Medical Colleges, and Education Council in this 100-member consortium. And we have our colleagues from mathematics and from all the other many of the other fields there within this member group. We are actually developing draft policies right now that our constituent member societies can have options about what they do about different issues. It extends all the way from having policies that allow us to affect behaviors, for example, in our conferences. If they've demonstrated that you have a bad actor there, to be able to, how do we manage that in a way that we can, in fact, have a code of conduct for our meetings.
Great. And I'm going to try to get another question in real quickly. Dr. Jemison, you mentioned the ongoing National Academies of Science study addressing the barriers for advancement. Through my work on the Education and Labor Committee, we've made progress on addressing some of those barriers, but I'm concerned about our lack of understanding of issues regarding the retention of women and people of color. So I'm going to ask you and Ms. Whye. We know that cultural changes and willingness to confront the implicit and explicit biases in the workforce are essential, but what policy changes can Congress explore to improve the retention of women in STEM fields?
So the report that we were coming out in November, we're very excited about it and have some more concrete ideas. But really quickly, part of it is holding people accountable for what they do and doing bias training.
Okay.
And recognition as part of perhaps tenure process, as part of processes for promotion, so that it is ingrained into the culture.
Right. And Ms. Whye?
So quickly, I think where there is leadership accountability and transparency of data, anywhere you have the opportunity to be transparent with your data and also holding leadership accountable for the barriers that exist for women is where you can support.
And you have, you call it hotline or warm line?
Warm
or
line.
something?
We actually have a
How's that
warm
work?
line service that we implemented inside Intel. It's an innovative service that employees that are challenged by being retained inside the company can reach out to these case managers and get assistance right away so that we can retain them inside of Intel. Over 20,000 cases, we have over a 80% save rate of our employees.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Moore, we often hear in this committee about the importance of mentorship and applied learning opportunities, like internships, apprenticeships, and you recommend that colleges look to increase the amount of quality faculty-student mentorship and research experiences to keep students in STEM. Can you please elaborate on your recommendation and provide some examples of how programs at the federal science agencies could support those activities?
Thank you for the question. There's a new initiative at the National Science Foundation called GRIP, and basically that initiative is trying to give individuals opportunity to have real-time experiences. As we know that having real-time experiences is one of those factors. When I say real-time experience, apprenticeships, internships, co-ops, they allow individuals to go deeper in their content area. And not only that, they begin to explore new opportunities that further engages their interest in those kinds of things. At Ohio State, we have an initiative. It's a Big Ten consortium called the Summer Research Opportunities Program, and some of the institutions have a focus on STEM. Ours is a little bit more broad, but majority of the participants are STEM majors. We know academic achievement is highly correlated with the relationship that a student has with his or her major professor, as well as the number of contact hours. Having research experiences is a strong indicator of whether or not you'll go to graduate and professional schools. And those kind of experiences, too often, students foreclose on exploring these opportunities because based on what they think research is. So it's very important. We know that when women and other underrepresented groups have hands-on experiences, they're more likely to stay in those kinds of activities. So part of the university enterprise should really be thinking about how do we develop an academic experience that it goes beyond the didactic, but it has the experiential pieces. And as I indicated in my earlier remarks, we're trying to do that with J.P. Morgan Chase as a test bed where they come and actually have office hours, and they're going to be engaged with our students ongoing so they can develop the workforce skills ongoing. And particularly some students, when they come from communities where they're the first in their families to go to college or they're pioneers, sometimes they don't know the importance of participating in these kinds of activities. So it's very important that we get diverse faculty so we can begin to shatter myths and share realities and be role models. But also it's important that we have support systems in place in our institutions, our higher learner, that further support students and help them guide them in certain places. I'm here, I like to share that at Ohio State, we've only had 7 Rhodes Scholars in our history. And, 3 were in the early 1900s, but the last 2 came out of my office, and they came from parents of immigrants. And so those things just don't happen. You can be very bright, have high aptitude, and still don't perform at an optimal level. So it's important that we build these kinds of things in the curriculum.
Absolutely. Dr. Jemison, workforce's needs across the country for aerospace and technical technicians are great, including Oklahoma, and many good-paying jobs are going unfilled. Women are particularly underrepresented in the aerospace field. Could you expand for a moment on the barriers to women in aerospace and how we should address that?
Many times it's the perspective that people have about who does what jobs, what they've seen visibly, whether it's in media, where they see the professors. That makes a difference. When you look at workforce, though, many of the jobs that you see in aerospace, they have machinists, they're people who are, riveting stuff, putting things together. And these have been jobs that traditionally people don't think of women as doing. But yet girls do as well as, are actually better than boys in math and science all the way through high school. And many of these jobs are filled with people coming out of high school. And then if you start to look at their apprenticeship jobs. And so we have to actively bring in girls out of high school into these apprenticeship kinds of programs, because that's going to make a difference, and let them know that, yes, this is a part of what you can do. And what's really important about that is those jobs pay well. And so women who put so much money into their homes and to their children would have even that much more to support the future.
Absolutely. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Financial aid is real important for folks in diverse populations to go to college. In Tennessee, we have a lottery that's dedicated to higher ed, and part of the lottery is merit-based, and some of it's need-based. How important is it for these scholarship programs, and if you have them in Ohio and familiar with them in other states, to be need-based in addition to merit-based and getting students that opportunity to go to college? I don't know who should go first. Maybe Dr. Moore, because I know you're at the Ohio State University.
As you know, Ohio State is a land-grant university, and stand true to that mission. Our president, Michael Drake, has made it as a major part of his platform is to make college more affordable. In fact, I'm proud to say Ohio State is one of the national leaders. And so for every Ohio residence, we cover costs for tuition for every high school, every Pell eligible student at Ohio State, and then it just went to our regional campuses. And that it is we've invested over $100 million into this, but I can say it's still not enough.
What are the results that you've seen from that? Have you seen higher graduation rates?
Oh yeah, our graduation rates is still on a vertical trajectory. But not only that, as our institution, historically, we've had a tension between land grant and flagship. We're both. And so our average ACT is a 29.2. And some alums will say, we were open admissions prior to 1987. And so it used to be your birthright. If you had a high school diploma in Ohio, you could go to Ohio State. But now it's more difficult to do that. But what we found is not only when you have students, they all have the capability, but they all don't come in with the same kind of supports and traditions in their families. And what we've done is we put a major emphasis in creating support structures for our students to ensure that they are successful. And so they won't, first-generation college students oftentimes make unwise academic decisions, not because they're not smart, it's because they rely on the same people who, just like them, who have the same amount of knowledge. And what we try to do is to reach out to students early, and we try to coach them up ongoing to ensure that they're very successful. But the financial piece is critical, but it's not the only piece, because it only covers tuition.
Yeah, let me just chime in here. I think it's critically important because for some of the students, it creates a choice for them studying versus having to work. So the scholarships, and you'll see in my written testimony, we have a project with the ACES, which provides scholarships for our Native American students. And in doing so, that scholarship helps them in a couple of ways. One, they get paid internships at Intel, but also because they're having the paid internships, they're not having to really choose between studying and also having to work. So it's critically important.
Dr. Malcom, please.
Let me say that sometimes the amount of money that we're talking about is not really a lot. It's not necessarily just the cost of tuition. It may be that, in fact, that students need book money, but they don't have it at the time, in which case they delay getting their books until they can earn the money or whatever it is in order to do it. Well, that puts you behind. And there's also an increased number of students who are, in fact, employed, working full-time, who are also trying to go to school. And that's a more difficult road to hoe. I am a regent at Morgan State, and I chair the Finance and Facilities Committee. So I see the kinds of things that come across that can really stop students right in their track for lack of $500 for the books or $1,000 to be able to become financial. So it's really a very critical thing, but needs to be looked at across the board.
Thank you.
I might just add that, to the point that several have made, also many institutions are experimenting with having emergency funds available. I mean, for many low-income students, books, other critical needs for an education can be out of reach because they have to spend money on repairing their car because that's the only way they can get to school, or they have to spend money on their family. So having emergency dollars available out of the financial aid office is also a really effective strategy.
Have you noticed any? Yes, Dr.
I just wanted to add one thing. There is this romantic notion about working your way through school, and people have done that. But the reality is that it is not necessarily fair when those students are working and in classes with people who do not have to work their way through school. And our responsibility as a nation is to make sure that people have access and opportunity to develop their talents that we're going to need, all of us, in the years to come.
My time's up, but I thank each of you for your testimony. And it's what we need to have more need-based scholarships and people understanding that if you give people a step up, it's real important, not only for them, but for the whole society. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the Madam Chair. I appreciate you and the ranking member holding this hearing today. It's been very insightful. I appreciate all of the witnesses being here. I've read your testimony and listened to your testimony carefully. I appreciate it very much. And it's good to see Ms. Whye here representing Intel, which is so important to my community and my congressional district, and thank you. And I only want to say this with regard to Dr. Moore and the Ohio State University. Oddly enough, the largest engineering school in the country is right there at Arizona State University. So I just had to get that out. No competition from me, though. I just want you to know that. I'm grateful that you're here. I always prefer, and most people on this committee have heard me say this before, that the states and the private sector, rather than the federal government, take the lead on a lot of the issues we're talking about, particularly in expanding STEM opportunities. But I'm confident that regardless how we get there, I think all of us want to, in this room, share the same end goal. In order to remain internationally competitive, it is critical that an increasing number of American students are able to keep up with, and actually, in my mind, ideally outperform students from China, Western Europe, and elsewhere in the developed and developing world. The data suggests that the U.S. has made great strides over the past decade, even though we have a long way to go, particularly in the post-secondary level. According to research compiled by the National Center for Educational Statistics, graduate enrollments in science and engineering grew 15% over the past 10 years. Additionally, Latino, African American, and female participation in graduate STEM education increased by 122%, 35%, and 37% respectively over the same period. Certainly, there's more work to be done, particularly in K-12 education, but this seems to indicate we may be moving in the right direction. And going back to this private sector for a moment, I think so many efforts to encourage STEM and diversity hiring should originate in the private sector. And I appreciate Dr. Moore mentioning what Chase, I can't remember who else, J.P. Morgan Chase has done to assist Ohio State University. But clearly Intel has been a real leader in this area. The statistics speak for themselves: an 8.5% growth in female workforce and 17.7% growth in the number of historically underrepresented minorities just between 2015 and 2018 alone. Those accomplishments are testaments to your leadership, Ms. Whye, and also Intel. And I also want to thank Dr. Jemison for her comment with regarding two-year schools and their ability to turn out very accomplished technicians in the STEM field. We use those, and we see them in my district. We have, I'm trying to think, Boeing has many machine shops around my district filled with a diverse portfolio of workers because they've reached out and teamed up with community colleges. I'm most interested in learning a little bit more about the Tech Learning Lab and Intel Future Skills programs that you referenced in your testimony, Ms. Whye, and I'm wondering if you could give us a little more insight into your own engagement with these programs and share with us why you think they've been so successful at encouraging more young people to pursue STEM education.
Thank you. And I'm from the University of South Carolina, the other USC, and currently working on a PhD, obviously, at Arizona State University, so got to give it up for AZ. Just two things. So what's important about both of these programs and all of the programs that Intel is currently driving, it's really about access and opportunity, because in every corner of our communities, even like the rural community that I grew up in, there's a student there waiting to be engaged. And I think far too often we talk about the narrative of the students aren't interested, when quite frankly, the students are interested. It's on us to bring the STEM and STEAM to these students. So both the Tech Learning Labs as well as the Intel Future Skills, these programs are put in place to do that, to ensure that in our communities and to ensure that communities around the nation, that we can give access to these students so that they are developing the critical skills that they will need to compete in this nation and to help Intel with its future workforce. So specifically, the Tech Learning Lab, you could think of it as a really cool bus that's driving through the rural communities in your neighborhood, and that bus is equipped with all sorts of fun technologies that you can just geek out. That's kind of the visualization for that. The Intel's Future Skills program is very similar in that it gives the students hands-on skills and entrepreneurship skills so that they can do hands-on, because the research, and Dr. Jemison will agree with this, it's easier for our students to see it if they can actually touch the technology and do the hands-on projects. So it's a very easy way to give our students access, and I think all of us could play a role in that and do more of that.
Thank you very much. My time has expired.
Thank you very much. Mr. McAdams.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas, for your leadership on the STEM Opportunities Act to build our American workforce and to include more Americans in our STEM careers. Utah, my home, is also home to several life sciences and medical companies, medical device companies, a robust technology sector, and an ecology that provides unique opportunities for environmental research. When I talked with business and university leaders in Utah working in this wide range of STEM fields, the top concern that I hear is about their ability to recruit the bright students and the workers that they need to keep their organizations, and not to mention our country, globally competitive. Utah has amazing community partners working to address these needs, including our higher education institutions, like Salt Lake Community College, which has partnered with local Title I junior high schools to sponsor robotics teams and to provide more hands-on STEM learning to students. And businesses in Utah's Silicon Slopes area, like Adobe, which has engaged students from the Ute tribe in workshops designed not only to teach tech skills, but also encourage their creativity and passion for further learning. So I was interested in your comments about scholarships to Native Americans. We certainly have more work to do in each of our communities and in Congress to ensure that all students have the opportunity to study STEM and to pursue a career in innovative and well-paying STEM fields. So my first question is to Ms. Whye, and thank you for your testimony. Your testimony notes that retention is a key issue for Intel's and other STEM businesses' workforces, and I can tell you that I regularly hear the same thing from employers in my district. And, certainly we need to do more to educate and train that workforce, but once we do get them into the workforce, to retain them and keep them in the workforce. So I'm interested from your private sector experience at Intel, what programs or practices have helped Intel to create a more inclusive workspace for your employees from underrepresented backgrounds?
Great, thank you. At its simplest, for your employees, from their point of view, they walk into your companies as if they are a bank. Negative transactions result in withdrawals from the bank. Positive transactions result in deposits. So at Intel, what we learn is when our employees are at insufficient funds, they call our warm line. And the warm line service is backed by case managers, and employees get to ask their questions about their pay, their managers. It could be they're ready for their next job assignment. And through using this innovative service, and I think all companies should have a warm line, all universities should have a warm line. And in fact, the warm line equivalent for me at my university was the engineering program office, right? You agree? And so what we've learned about retention is really two things. Because we've had this warm line in place, over 20,000 cases now, we now have predictive analytics that can tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And the two top themes from the warm line are employees want to progress and they want to have a good connection between them and their manager. Based on those predictive analytics, what Intel has then done is we've retrained all 13,000 of our managers so that they have the leadership muscle to ensure that they're creating the right inclusive environments for their employees.
So you started on my second question, which is what kind of type of training do you give to managers? In my experience as an employee, I was county executive before coming to Congress, and we had 4,000 employees, and leadership starts at the top too, right?
Yeah,
You create the
absolutely.
environment, but what type of things do you do for your managers?
We have an in-house training that's called Managing at Intel. One of the modules in that training is how to lead as an inclusive leader. It's based on the content of Amy Edmondson, creating a psychologically safe environment for employees to bring their voices to the table, and how you can facilitate as a leader and be a coach as a leader as opposed to not allowing your employees to be heard. That would be one very specific example.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the very talented witnesses that we have here today. I appreciate it very much. My first question goes to Ms. Whye. Many of our universities have programs designed to promoting diversity in STEM. Purdue University, for example, has a division of diversity and inclusion, and each department has their own diversity program as well, including a Women in Science program at Purdue's College of Science and the Minority Engineering program in their College of Engineering. So my question to you is, you mentioned some of the programs that Intel has been able to use to create a more diverse STEM workforce. How do some of the things I just mentioned above, like at Purdue, are you able to work with those programs? Are they beneficial to getting people into the program, into the STEM programs?
Absolutely. So we have strong partnerships with several universities. And what I would say about it is it's not enough to get the talent in the door at Intel. So we haven't had huge obstacles getting the talent into Intel. Our obstacles have been more around the retention and inclusion of talent once the students, women and underrepresented minorities, enter into Intel. So we actually did a study inside of Intel to make sure that we could get to the root of what were some of the specific challenges in the way of retaining talent at Intel, and asking our employees who are staying at Intel what's at the root of them staying. And I think we can all agree on some of those critical elements. It's really largely around having an inclusive environment where I feel a sense of belonging. That's critically important. The second thing is to have a sense of community. So inside of Intel, we have about 29 employee resource groups so that individuals can have a place, a safe landing to ask some of their difficult questions. And then I think the third thing is just the leadership and the leadership accountability, which is what I spoke about in my written testimony about how we're training managers to be more inclusive.
Thank you. My second question goes to Dr. Moore, and you know, since we're getting these university priorities corrected, I just wanted you to know, maybe you're not aware that Purdue University considers the Ohio State University as our eastern campus, just in case that. Anyway, this year I introduced, I'm watching you recover from that, I'm just, this year I introduced with my colleague and chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology, Mrs. Haley Stevens, the building blocks of the STEM Act. And this legislation would work to ensure that NSF provides research and insight into STEM education during early childhood, and particularly for girls. So my question to you, Dr. Moore, is one of the lessons you brought up was that students are underserved in the underserved communities are often unprepared for college-level STEM work. Do you think there is a real gap in the pipeline for our young children's STEM education? And if so, what should we do to address that gap?
Certainly, you know, our zip codes do matter currently. Unfortunately, you know, when I was talking about Shelby and Omari, Shelby grew up in Beverly, Ohio, but I didn't finish. Even though she had struggles, we kind of supported her through our office, and she's now a PhD student at the University of Cambridge in the UK, right? And so, thank goodness we have an institution like what we have to support students and help them reach their dreams and aspirations. And Amari is a constant on the dean's list, even though, so great minds come from every zip codes. I think first and foremost, our society has to believe that, and how we can coach. Everybody needs coaching. I know Congressman Gonzalez, a former NFL star Buckeye football player, and Coach Tressel coached him up no matter how good he was. And so I'm saying that that's the philosophy we have, is that we want students to reach optimal success, regardless whether you're fifth generation college student or whether you're gonna be the first in your family in college student. I think when we talk about we have to change the whole ecosystem, and we know when families sometimes may not be able to play their part, our schools used to play a part. But now our schools are fragile, our communities are fragile, and it's making it very difficult. So our land grants, our public and private institutions, our higher learning, they're required to do even more. But not only that, we can't do it by ourselves without industries and community, because they play it is a part of the ecosystem. And so some of the students, when you're first, you have anxiety about being the first. You're going places that no one has ever been before, and sometimes you don't know how to ask for help. And it's not because even when they have a 4.0, Shelby was one of the top students in our high school. But you come to Ohio State, you're talking about any given day, we got 100,000 people near our campus, and it can be quite overwhelming if you don't have the right support. So we're working on that, not only for students, incoming freshmen, but we're even working on it, how we do a better job with our transfer students. When you go to schools that may not have all the resources, the two-year college route is becoming a preferred route to get to Ohio State and Purdue and other places. And so our institutions of higher learning have to do more. But I would say this, I would be remiss, there's no federally funded program probably been more impactful for broadening participation than the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. What might be an idea, how could we think about that and expanding it? Our grant is $4.5 million. We have 10 universities. 10 universities trying to share $4.5 million. It's not a lot of money, but thinking about how do we leverage what we all do to make even greater impact.
Thank you. I think I'm out of time. Did you have?
I just want to add, and I don't know if this is out of order, but to add something about the question of childhood and what happens as we get children through. We're mistaken sometimes when we believe that we have to get students interested in science. We come out of the chute excited about science. We're picking up the bugs, the snails, the stuff in the couch. We're asking what it is. What happens many times is that children go to school, instead of using this prodigious construct for learning that all children have, it's very well documented for childhood, we demotivate them. We take the energy away by teaching science in a way that it just isn't. Science is really about hands-on. What is the most, besides parents, what is the most impactful part of this is teachers. And many teachers in K-12, or say K-8, have not had science as a specialty. And so we have to really make sure that we look at teacher training. And again, I want to just go to the idea of teacher certification. How do we support that so that teachers actually are able to do the work that maintains the student interest, that helps them to build the kind of resilience that they need to continue through? If we do that and build science literacy, then we will have the pipeline, the resilient pipeline that we need to go into skilled labor, 4-year degrees, or postdoctorate degrees.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. McNerney for 5 minutes.
First of all, I want to thank the panel for coming today and for your work in this area. It's important. STEM programs form a cornerstone of the United States educational system and were created to ensure that the United States remains competitive in the global marketplace. However, data shows that there is a growing gap in STEM-related educational achievements between men and women. While women earn over half of college degrees in the United States, they hold only 28% of STEM-related jobs. That's why I plan on introducing the Getting Involved in Researching, Learning, and Studying of STEM Act. That's the Girls STEM Act, which combined with this bill under discussion today will help address this inequality. My legislation would help establish a program in the United States Department of Education to provide grants to eligible local educational agencies to assist elementary and secondary schools in encouraging and preparing female students in STEM careers. This would ensure that more female students participate in and have access to STEM educational opportunities. And you know, we're leaving out a large block of very qualified, very talented people that would help enhance our economy and our national security. So it's very important that we do this. Dr. Jemison, in your testimony, you highlighted several barriers to women in STEM. Included in this list is less access to mentoring and higher service expectations. With so few women in leadership positions, how can we balance the need for these women to serve as mentors and role models and to make sure their voices are heard without putting too much of a service burden on them?
So the comment that has been made a couple of times is how important mentorship is, and mentorship being people who care about your careers, help you see new opportunities, and very frequently mentors who are similar to you are most effective. Yet it can be very effective where others mentor you as well, and so there needs to be some onus put on everyone in academia or other professions, that they have individuals that they're responsible for in terms of making sure that they are brought into the system. So when I joined NASA, I was the first woman of color to go into the astronaut program, and I had a big brother who helped me to sort of navigate what was going on, and that made a difference. And so I think that part of the way that we decrease the burden on women of color and women, period, is by making sure that everyone has a responsibility. In fact, we could say that it is the department chair in academia who have the responsibility for making sure that postdocs who are coming in, that students are coming in, are actively mentored. People who already have tenure, very frequently, so to do that burden piece. So if you're a woman, and you're an academic institution, and then you're asked to do all the work around women and community and keeping them in, yet at the same time, you're having to do all your tenure work as well. And you get no credit for the community work. And so maybe we could also look at how do we do credit for community work? There are many different
Thank you. I
ways,
only
and
have
it's
5
something
minutes,
that we
so I'd
need
like to
do.
get to another
Thank you.
question. Dr. Moore, are there policies or practices that you have found to be effective in increasing participation of women and underrepresented minorities in STEM at Ohio State that you believe could be practiced at other institutions?
Many of our academic units have mentoring programs specifically for women, but not only that, we try to create a community for women where they can draw and share resources. But not only that, what we are finding, and right now we're in this process of trying to revisit our benefits around leave, family leave, which is a big component that sometimes women opt out of the academy, particularly at the professorate level. But also we're thinking about other mechanisms in which we can begin to keep people in the profession. The other piece in regard what we know that has been very supportive is when you have representation, diverse faculty attracts diverse students. When you look at the faculty who tend to graduate the most women, they typically are women. And I think that's why most of us do it the opposite. We focus on the students rather than the faculty. But the faculty is play a critical role in whether or not you get a PhD or a graduate degree, because they make selections and grants, et cetera. The advanced grant is the big grant that we have an advanced program on our campus, and what they constantly do is present best practices, exemplary practices that we can use on campus. But the new initiative is we have programs specifically for the male faculty, because sometimes we have implicit biases. We communicate differently sometimes that sometimes alienate our women colleagues. And so we have lots of programs like that on campus.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Gonzalez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this important hearing. The beauty of tech, in my opinion, or one of the beauties of tech, is that we know for sure, from experience and data suggests us, that diverse viewpoints and diverse experiences help us build better technology. I ran a technology company, and it was clear the more diverse we were, and we did a great job on this, the better our products were, the easier it was for us to serve our customers. And so I think the fact that this has become a national imperative in many senses is fantastic. My first question will go to my friend Dr. Moore. There's been a lot of crazy talk on who the real OSU is here. I mean, we just, would you agree that the real OSU is Ohio State?
Affirmative.
Thank you. Now that we've got that out of the way. You know, and frankly, I want to commend you. I am so proud of you and the university as I was reading your testimony and listening to you today, to know that Ohio State is working so hard on this and you're getting it right. I couldn't possibly be happier sitting in this chair. So I just want to thank you and everybody at the university for the work that you're doing. I think the anecdotes that you shared are really powerful because we're talking about two totally different backgrounds, but ultimately we're kind of driving towards the same goal, and you have different programs, which makes perfect sense. I want to read a part of your testimony. You mentioned we found that family influence and encouragement, positive K-12 academic experiences, their own interests and aspirations in STEM, as well as their academic experiences in colleges with peers, were all crucial impacting factors in African-American male achievement. It strikes me, and I've heard this echoed before, it strikes me that the family influence part is maybe the hardest at the university level to kind of, I guess, encourage. I guess I'd ask the question to you and to anybody, how can we do a better job, and not just in the African-American community, but broadly, of making sure that our parents and kind of local leaders are promoting STEM as well?
Well, what we do through our Young Scholars Program, we recognize not only you educating the child, you're educating the family as well. In the state of Ohio, we survey all 12th graders across race, gender, urbanicity, et cetera. And when you ask what individual has been most influential in your educational/career aspirations, every year it's families.
Yep.
So families are influencing your child, whether they went to college or whether they didn't go to college. And so it's very important that we recognize the importance of families. And even when they have a college education, what we do, what we're very proud of, we have the only center that focuses on African-American males in the United States. And I'm here to say, I'm proudly that when I first started, we only had about 130 African-American males who had a cumulative 3.0 or better. And today we had 692 out of 1,291, nearly 50% of our African-American males on our campus, athletes or non-athletes, have a cumulative 3.0 or better. And what we found is there are certain things that play out in our school systems. I'm not trying to be sexist or any of that kind of, that plays out for different groups, just like we hear my colleagues talk about women, but minority males have similar experiences that sometimes is suppressed and that impacts their educational outcomes.
Yep. Thank you. And then shifting to Dr. Malcom. So a 2018 recent report published by National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine mentions that 50% of women faculty and staff at academic institutions report having been harassed. We talked about this yesterday. You all weren't here, but this was a topic of conversation yesterday in this hearing. And the simple question I've asked now for the fourth time, and I think we're getting close to being able to produce something, is how can we do better? What can we possibly do to make sure that we're cutting those instances down, and how can we foster an environment that is more conducive to women? And I mean, we should just eradicate this from STEM if we could, right? So I'll open up to you.
I think that right now what we're seeing is trying to operate on multiple tracks. Trying to look at the issue of preventing harassment, not just dealing with it once it's there. How do we change the culture that is within institutions with regard to graduate students and postdocs, so that when they come through the system, that they understand that this is not a good thing in terms of supporting the environment for STEM. And the professional societies have stepped up in terms of saying that, in terms of our fields, that we do not think that harassment has any place within our fields. For the disciplines themselves to say that this is not to be tolerated is a major point of movement, and we are very pleased to see that.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Ms. Hill for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Dr. Moore, the relationship between a faculty advisor and his or her students, including graduate students and postdocs, is highly imbalanced in terms of power. I'm really proud of the number of women who are entering, young women who want to enter the STEM field. This is happening in my district. We're a huge aerospace center in my district and biotechnology, and so we're seeing more and more young women who want to get into that space. But we still have these huge inequities and concerns around the balance of power. Most STEM faculty manage that imbalance carefully and respectfully, but abuse also happens with little recourse for students. If the student just quits, or even if she reports through official channels, her entire career may be derailed. Minority, female, and first-generation college students are especially vulnerable. This actually happened to a woman who has worked for me before, who was she was working in a lab at her university, and it was pervasive sexual harassment happening from her advisor. Many women quit. They left. Finally, they stood up and said that this was enough. They got together. They coordinated around it. It went through the entire process at the university. And at the end of the day, after going through everything, the public exposure, et cetera, the advisor got 2 days off, and that was it. So direct sources of funding from fellowships such as the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship give graduate students more autonomy, but that helps just a tiny fraction of all STEM trainees. What discussions are underway about policies to better protect trainees and, more importantly, to reduce the incidence of abuse of power altogether?
Well, I can tell you what is mandatory. We just created it newly. We just made the announcement. We just hired someone at Ohio State, a new office called the Office of Institutional Equity, and it's going to focus on those very things that you highlighted. But not only that, it is now, as Dr. Malcom was indicating, a major milestone for our university. It is mandated. It's a requirement that all faculty, all staff, all students have to take mandatory training. And that's a major milestone. And not only that, people have blind spots, and it is very inappropriate. And sometimes people, they been socialized, they've been doing things for a long time, and that carry out in places to where it was inappropriate from the get-go, and they doing it in public spaces that may isolate individuals. So we're hoping that the training, and not only that, this office is going to, and this office, the person reports directly to the provost, because we wanted to communicate to the university community that this is a serious affair, and we wanted to stop.
Dr. Malcom, yeah.
Yes, I want to also indicate that I think our agencies now are also stepping up because in issues at times when there has been verified that there is a serious, credible allegation, removing that person from a PI responsibility, from actually interacting with the rest of the space, the people in the space. I think that seeing that the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health are beginning to move on those issues is a real step forward, because it's sending a very different signal than we have had in the past, that in fact, if you get lots of grants, that the behavior might be tolerated because of the impact, the money impact that it actually has on the institution.
Thank you so much. Do any of the rest of you want to weigh in?
So sure. Go.
I was just going to comment just from the work that we're doing with the National Academy's Women's Study for increasing participation. Some of the issues we have to talk about is what you said is the power relationship between the faculty advisor and the candidate is so strong that it's a place where everyone should hold it as an egregious attack on the academy when faculty members abuse that position. And in fact, the idea of holding their funding accountable to it from the agencies would make a really big difference, because money does push things along. And if the agency said, if you have those kinds of issues, that we're not going to fund you, it would make a big difference.
So would you see a student, for example, who doesn't feel like they get proper recourse from the university or the lab itself, having an ability to go to the funding source?
Well, I think that there should be transparency and a requirement from the funding sources to say what has been going on, to show, just like you have to show that you have procedures in place for other kinds of requirements, government requirements, the requirements that you are not harassing. Other compliance, that's a term, that you're complying with not harassing students.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time. I yield back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Balderson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here this morning. One of the, and Dr. Moore, thank you very much. Appreciate your time here, and it's always good to see constituents. And one of the issues that drives the skills gap we are seeing is the access to just basic broadband. We talk about broadband, but let's talk about basic broadband. As you all are certainly aware, if you lack access to the internet, in 2019 you're at a huge disadvantage in developing marketable skills. Of the 24 million Americans that do not have basic broadband internet access, 83% live in the rural communities. Could you each talk about what your organizations are doing to ensure rural communities have an equal opportunity to succeed? Dr. Moore, if you would start, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for the work that you do. And this is a very important topic. It's a part of our ethos at Ohio State because we're a land-grant university. And many of our extension programs work aggressively to ensure that opportunities are available to our rural constituents. In fact, all 88 counties in Ohio, they're guaranteed at least one full ride in every county in the state of Ohio. We provide a lot of outreach, but not only that, another example of it is, as you know, that the opiates crisis has plagued many of the rural areas in the state of Ohio. And Ohio State is providing leadership to address those issues. But we know some of it is a lack of opportunities. And that's probably one of the biggest cures, is to ensure that individuals have opportunities in those areas. But not only that, with our Access and Affordability Grant, it's ensuring that students won't foreclose on trying to come to Ohio State because they can't afford it. We're trying to make it even more affordable. So we have regional campus, we have the Columbus campus. On our regional campuses, we just recently started the Access Affordability. It's a lot cheaper on the regional campus, and plus we have these grant opportunities. So we want to make education accessible to our students.
Oh, go ahead. I'll just talk about our Navajo Nation project. We have 3 schools that we're partnering with just north of Phoenix, Arizona. We provide culturally sensitive curriculum. And we also, what we haven't talked about today a lot is the importance of a collective impact arrangement so that industry plus academia plus other companies can come together, because not one company can do it alone. So in the case of the Navajo Nation, we're partnering with Cisco, who actually helps to bring the broadband to those schools that we're partnering with, because we think that's also important.
So just to put a number to it, 1 in 6 of the nation's undergraduate students attend rural colleges and universities, and I think this is a group that goes under-discussed and underserved. I liked that you brought up the partnerships that exist between tribal colleges and universities and local business and industry as a way to serve those communities which are often located in rural areas. Another thing that we're doing at ACE is trying to shine a light on what are called education deserts. So these are places where educational access is limited in terms of higher education. There may be no options, there may be 1 or 2 options, and one of the 2 might be too expensive or out of reach for some of these students. In addition to broadband, I think we've discussed satellite campuses, also the ability for community colleges located in these areas to have dorms where students can live. It's not common to have dorms at community colleges, but many of these deserts have that as their offering, and some of these institutions have built residences. I'll say one more thing is the power of dual enrollment in these areas, and that's another role of community colleges, which is to provide dual enrollment for the high schools in the region, which allows those students to have a more promising path to go to the flagship in that state or a 4-year institution.
We fully recognize the power and the importance of technology now, and how it can actually provide access that wasn't possible before. And it isn't just to rural communities, actually to urban ones as well. We have poverty places everywhere. And I think that in our case, in the case of AAAS, what we have done in the past is always to try to not necessarily to design for the broadband. We try to design for the lowest, most ubiquitous technology that we can find. And that often means that you're doing things on phones because that's what people have. And I think that we need to look across the spectrum as we are really seeking the opportunities until we can get better.
Thank you all very much. And Dr. Moore, as you and I know, Beverly, Ohio, where the young lady is succeeding in getting her PhD, is from a very lack of rural area. So I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Caston for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel. Dr. Jemison, I think we owe you an apology, because with all of this talk about OSU and ASU, there has been no recognition of the Thayer School of Engineering, where I got my graduate degree from at Dartmouth College. And I think particularly in this panel on inclusion, the historic underrepresentation on today's panel. It's duly noted. On a more serious note, I served for about 10 years on the Corporate Collaboration Council at Thayer, and well, we were very proud of the fact that it was the first undergraduate engineering school in the country to reach gender parity. I spent 16 years as the CEO of a clean energy company, and was fairly proud of the fact that merit doesn't discriminate. We didn't either, and for totally selfish reasons, we had a diverse workforce. And for totally unwelcome reasons, when you treat all people with decency, people who have not been treated with decency elsewhere give you more loyalty than you probably deserve. And there are greedy reasons to do that, and I would hope we'd all do that. I mention that not out of looking for praise, but acknowledging a limitation, which is that in neither of those institutions did the diversity that we had reflect the diversity of the country. It reflected the diversity of the applicant pool. And you cannot discriminate, and I'm glad that you all mentioned intentionality in your conversations that we have to get to. And I want to start with Dr. Espinosa. In those higher education institutions, I had a phenomenally diverse student body that I went to school with and later, had some kind of a mentorship role with. It was largely diverse in the international sense because that reflected the diversity of our applicant pool. What do we need to be doing at the primary education level to help ensure that that the diversity of applicants more accurately reflects the diversity of this country?
Sure. Well, it all starts there, right? It all starts where students start their journeys, which is at the primary school level. I think there's a lot more that higher education can do to reach that far down. Many admissions offices, when they are doing outreach, and I know this because I'm a former admissions officer myself, really focus at the high school level. And by the time students get to high school, they're already on an educational path that determines where they will go to college and what they will study in college, and this is especially true in the STEM disciplines. So some of the promising activities that I've seen on college campuses include more of a focus on making sure that they're providing a pathway, maybe not to their institution, certainly to their institution, but to higher education overall by focusing their activities and their outreach and the work that they do with teachers and others that serve students in these spaces, that they also focus there in addition to the pool that they get coming out of high school.
Thanks. If I could sort of move up the educational chain. Dr. Moore, you made the point earlier about sort of hiring people who look like the students and helping with retention, which I wholeheartedly support. I'm curious, Dr. Jemison, given some of the diversity of institutions you've been involved in, are there any that strike you as being really a sort of exceptional best practices from the higher education level at both reaching down to attract people and then making sure that we retain them?
So let me just sort of say that one of the issues is exposure. Having students exposed to the range of activities, the range of things that are included in STEM disciplines. I want to comment on Dartmouth and Thayer School of Engineering, not only reaching parity in the number of women engineers growing, but actually I think one year it was actually more women graduated. Yeah. And part of that was the kind of education that's given at the school, which has a liberal arts requirement for the engineers, and they also have a lot of projects, which really work with people seeing the application. But I believe it's exposure. I cannot tell you of a university that necessarily does things best. I can go back and say that when universities allow students to come in on their campuses, when they're in grade school, when they're in their early high school years, it makes a difference. When programs are held that purposefully include students, it makes a difference. But the one program I want to mention was something called the Junior Engineering Technical Society, and where they would bring in junior high school students to University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana and expose them to engineering for 2 weeks. Makes a really big difference because all of a sudden you know that these careers exist.
Thanks. With a little bit of time, Ms. Whye, I just wanted to, if you could just quickly chime in at the end from the employer side. The applicant pool, if you aren't with intent, looks a lot like those of us on this panel, unfortunately. And there are things that Intel can do as a large company, and yet so many of our companies are small employers. What's your advice to small employers who may not have the size of your HR department to reach out with intent?
Yeah, so there's a saying that likes, and likes also tend to hire likes. So one of the easiest things to do would be to develop an inclusive hiring methodology. And we have this inside of Intel, and what it looks like is the applicant pool is diverse and inclusive. The interviewers on the other side are also diverse and inclusive. And inside Intel, you also have to post a formalized rec. So we find far too often that jobs are secured through the network or through tapping. So where you can formalize the structure, be inclusive in your hiring pool, to your great point, and also have diverse interviewers that's reflective of that pool on the other side. That action in and of itself has increased our ability to get in more diverse talent.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for being here today. This is a critical issue to me. This is a critical issue for my district, and I think for the national security of this country. I represent the 6th District of Florida in North Florida, and spent our Easter work period visiting Daytona Beach State College, where they have a vocational and STEM training program, also Pine Ridge High School, which has, where we had a skills forum, Bethune-Cookman, which is a historically black college that received university status in 2007, located in Daytona Beach, and of course Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I appreciate everyone's thoughts today at how to get at this and how to do this better. I just want to emphasize, again, I'm also on the Armed Services Committee. We are dealing with a situation abroad where we need to combat extremism, both abroad and at home, but also our near peer and our peer competitors in China and Russia, and STEM's critical to both. And I have said and will continue to say that when we look at the extremism problem, where women thrive in countries abroad and in communities here, where they are thriving in civil society, where they're thriving in politics, where they're thriving in business, extremism doesn't. It's squashed. That is something, so we just need to get this out of the domestic, I think, forum and get it squarely as a national security issue. I would want to know if you all agree with me there, number one. And then number two is we're looking at the 21st century space race, which is near and dear to what we're dealing with in Florida and also in the Armed Services Committee. We don't have a workforce, and we're not creating a workforce to compete. And that is alarming. We're going from $500 billion in a space economy to $2.7 trillion. That will be dependent on space. The average person touches space dozens of times a day and doesn't even realize it, whether it's banking, markets, navigation, you name it. So question one for you. The president or the administration issued a report charting the course for success, America's strategy for STEM education. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that, December 2018. If you have had a chance to see it, I'd love to know. Dr. Malcom, I see you nodding your head yes. What do you agree with? What do you think could be improved? What are your thoughts on this strategy the administration just put out?
There are two major points to the strategy. One is the focus on workforce, and the other is the focus on diversity. And I would absolutely agree with both of them. I think that the major issue is, though, how do we get there? And I think that there is a pulling the pieces together across our agencies is necessary, but it's not sufficient. The STEM workforce is a national workforce, and yet we basically don't think nationally when we do this. In Ohio, they look at the Ohio State University, but they also look at Ohio University and Akron and Toledo and all of the community colleges to fill in that space. And I think that this notion about how do these pieces come together is the reason that I have basically focused on a strategy to try to operate at scale, because we can't do this just one piece at the time. And I do hope that we will start to focus in on how that piece actually overlays with these larger issues of pulling the rest of the pieces together.
Do you think the report does a sufficient job at describing programmatically how the federal government can help and assist states get at this issue, or do you think it's lacking, or where?
I think it's not enough.
Federally, what can we do from from this position. I understand the states have a huge role, universities, academia, local, and personally, I think that's where education decisions should be made, but what can we do to support specifically, just in the time that I have, or reinforce that we're already doing?
Well, I think that a lot of the programs that are already in place are actually need to be kind of revisited in terms of how they help the institutions put the pieces together. But I also think that the business community has a major role to play
Completely
as a
agree.
partner in all of this and try to put these strategies together in a way that is really coherent. And some of that is, I think, part of the intention around includes from the National Science Foundation. But again, it is necessary, but it is not sufficient.
I think we're doing a great job here of describing the problem. I would love any follow-up you could send to my office on specific solutions that you've seen that are effective or ones that we're currently, frankly, throwing resources at that are ineffective. So I certainly welcome that.
I look forward to it.
So just one specific idea, and it's in my written testimony and maybe outside the scope of this committee, but one low-hanging fruit, I believe, is encouraging the Defense Department to leverage its ROTC program to help build a stronger, diverse workforce and tapping into that talent pool. So for example, the junior ROTC, it serves about 500,000 students, secondary students. Most often, they're very diverse and underrepresented minority students. By being able to go to that talent pool and bring in STEM and IoT, Internet of Things, or cybersecurity as a curriculum to those students, I think is a very low-hanging fruit item.
I think it's a fantastic idea, and thank you for that. I yield my time.
Thank you.
I'm over time, but thank you. Appreciate the chairwoman's indulgence.
I'll now recognize Mr. Lamb for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'll actually be happy to pick up right where you left off, ma'am, because I was just at a JROTC graduation on Saturday night in my district. I love those programs, and it's nowhere near as large or widespread as it should be. And really what I've seen in my short time in office is sometimes it's actually more privileged and well-off schools that are hosting these programs because of the resources that they have. And so they're doing excellent work, but we need to see it spread to the places that really need it the most. So I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to say about your experience with JROTC, but what I've seen, especially, and as a Marine, I hate admitting this, but the Air Force programs that I've seen are awesome because they really focus on the aerospace science at an early age, you know what I mean? And Marines don't worry as much about complicated science, I guess, but go ahead.
No, what I would just say there is back to Dr. Malcolm's point about scale. And so I think what we have to do is we have to look at where we have existing infrastructure already ready there and in place for us to tap into. So for all of us in high school, there were clubs that we were all a part of, science club, math clubs, taking the curriculum that we know is important for these students to get these critical skills and moving those critical skills into those clubs until we can get those critical skills into the curriculum of K through 12. I mean, if we wanted to get it right, we could start by changing the curriculum in K through 12. But absence of that, until we can catch up, we could insert that into these places like junior ROTC, the math club, the science club. And the students will tell you this, my experience working with Intel in our science fair. They know that more money is going to the athletic clubs in comparison to their science clubs. So I think the more we can work from that and work on that is also very helpful.
Thank you. Dr. Jemison, I see you want to jump in. I wanted to ask a related question anyway. Before I do that, I also wanted to say another existing institution that I think we forget about sometimes in these discussions is the role of labor unions, which has been an enormous force for progress on behalf of people of color for a very long time. And many of these jobs are STEM jobs, you know, electricians, steel workers, sheet metal workers. So I know you focused a little bit, Dr. Jemison, on the role of apprenticeships and opportunities short of a four-year degree. Have you seen what I'm talking about with the role of especially some of our more hands-on labor unions and apprentice programs in the building trades?
So I wanted to follow up particularly around the military and its capacity to actually train individuals who are skilled technicians and part of the skilled labor force. In fact, so many of the jobs in the military, whether you talk about in the Air Force, are, I know, Navy staff sergeants
Just keep
who
rubbing
run
it
in
in.
things.
Yeah.
Like this.
All the other
But if people knew, women knew, girls knew coming out of high school about the opportunities that are available in the military to be trained in some of these kinds of professions, it would make a big difference in the fact that those professions actually make more money than some of the ones that they're geared to. And so if the military actively recruited women into those jobs, it would make a difference and also help them to develop a pathway. In terms of the labor unions, and labor unions have been fantastic in some cases. In some cases, because of the apprenticeship program, there have been a hindrance as well, because this is, again, one of those things where, what did you use the term, like and like, right? And so we have to have the conversation with labor unions as well so that they start to broaden their focus and their view.
Thank you. Last question also for you, Dr. Jemison, just because of your background. We found out when the White House submitted its budget this year that they thought we should cancel out the funding for NASA's Space Grants program, which is a relatively small part of the overall NASA budget, extremely small actually, and what it does is provide grants throughout the educational system to encourage people, but especially underrepresented minorities, women, people of color, to go in to training to become astronauts or to study aerospace. And we actually had a great example of this in my home state of Pennsylvania, where a recipient of a space grant program award eventually became an astronaut just a couple of years ago. I think maybe the first female astronaut from Pennsylvania, a Penn State graduate. And so it just seemed to me like a very successful program that was working at an extremely low cost, and I was surprised that the administration advocated that. Are you familiar with this program at all, or have you met people who've benefited from it?
I'm not very familiar with it. I have met people who have been involved with programs, but what I want to add on to that is there has been this push recently for the executive branch to pull funding for science education away from agencies. So it was going to be solidified under the Department of Energy. Department of Education. Yet the Department of Energy, NASA, they all have very fundamentally important and powerful science education programs that have done wonderful work over the years that cannot be replicated under the Department of Education. So one of the things I think it's vital for us to do is to understand that these organizations offer something that the Department of Education can't, and removing the small, as you said, amounts of money from those organizations is not going to benefit the country at large. In fact, it's going to hurt.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you. And now I will recognize myself for 5 minutes to ask a few follow-up questions. I really want to thank all of the panelists for being here. I think this has been one of the most informative and engaged panels, which is also why I let some of the answers run over, because we really get to the interesting stuff when we hear from you and about your ideas. For me, as the aunt of a niece in high school who wants to become an engineer, as a representative from Houston who's second piece of office art in my office here on the Hill is the Women of NASA Lego series that came at the same time as the Whataburger table tent from Texas, 2 critical items of office decor. I'm so pleased to have this group here and to hear from all of you. And I represent the energy capital of the world, and this is something I hear from companies across my district and employers across my district, that there is a real need for people in STEM fields, and that we need to be bringing our students along, that we need to have an emphasis on basic science and very advanced science, and that's what we do in my district. So I've been really interested to hear all of your ideas, and Ms. Whye, you talked a little bit about partnerships. I wrote lots of notes about these important words, partnerships. Dr. Moore, you talked about the ecosystem, and Dr. Jemison, you talked about teachers and mentors. Dr. Malcom, when you were talking about the agencies, Dr. Espinosa, all the ideas of these interesting ways that we all need to work together, and I think that that's a critical theme. So knowing that we just have a few more minutes, I was actually going to ask about the ROTC idea because that's such a great idea, and so I want to make sure that there's nothing that you all had in your written testimony that we haven't covered today that you would recommend as best practices or policies that we should hear and keep in this record of our hearing. Any ideas of things that you didn't get to touch on in the questions already that you would recommend, especially for my district, from companies to be able to broaden STEM participation. That continues to be a critical issue. But anything else that anyone wants to add in terms of partnership ideas or final thoughts, I welcome those.
I just want to make a comment about public-private partnerships. I've worked with Bayer Corporation for over a decade on their Making Science Make Sense program, which is about science literacy. And they have created curriculum-changing programs like ASSET, but also programs that look at skilled education, like the Bay Area Biotech Partners, which take at-risk students. It started with at-risk students in Berkeley, and these students graduated as certified biotechnicians. At risk meaning that they were not expected to graduate. But this is a thing that can happen with public-private partnerships. And as Ms. Whye said, it wasn't just about Bayer. It then started to encompass all of the biotech companies in the Bay Area. So there is a rich capacity of companies to participate across the spectrum from K-12 all the way into college and postdoc.
Thank you.
I'll just call out one more and kind of staying with the collective impact arrangement, because I think it's important for in the private partnerships and also in the industry, the academia partnerships. It's also important for those partnerships to align towards a very specific outcome and also put in the diligence to have a owner, whether it's one of the companies or if it's a third-party organization that is responsible for helping those partnerships come together and align around a very specific set of measurements and making sure that they're meeting on a cadence that they can go back and track those measurements to make sure they're getting that work done. One such partnership that we have in flight right now is called the Reboot Representation. This is kicked off by Melinda Gates and her organization called Pivotal Ventures. In that is multiple companies, but we're all working towards doubling the number of women of color in computer science degrees by 2025. Now, each of us may do different parts and bring in different dollars, but the machine is going towards the same destination. And I think sometimes in the partnerships are going in different directions. So we need to partner with a specific outcome on the other side. And in that partnership, by pooling all the resources together, you can then choose the right proposals that can push you towards the right outcome.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
I would just add in terms of partnerships, we have a very extensive discussion of public-private partnerships in the report that I talked about today. We also talk about incenting its institutions to partner with one another. And that's really important when it comes to graduate education. And the reason we did this work on minority serving institutions is because that's where the students of color are. So if we want to see more students of color in these graduate programs that we've touched on today, we need to create a pathway, and many institutions are doing this already, but really incentivize the pathway to the doctorate coming out of not only the four-year minority-serving institutions, but starting with the community colleges, which is really where many students of color, the majority, enroll. So it's also the connectivity across the institutions where they can further learn from one another in undertaking this effort. So that would mean creating consortiums and collaborations so that that learning is taking place.
Thank you very much. I see that I've gone over my allotted time. So before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank you all again for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for any additional questions that the committee may ask of all of you as the witnesses. You are now excused and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.